Pilate is perhaps one of the most intriguing yet enlightened characters in the entire novel. The events of her life have taken her to a multitude of journeys, escapades, and realizations. From birth, Pilate was not a normal child or a natural child, as some characters come to say. Her mother died shortly before her initial birth, and she was born without a navel. The lack of a navel would come back in the story multiple times. Pilate eventually overcame the hostility brought by it and learned to live a carefree, sex-deprived life. Pilate, along with her older brother Macon, would live on their father's farm until she was 12. After the death of their father, Macon dead I, Pilate and Macon escaped and lived in the household that Circe worked at, the butler household. They lived there for 2 weeks until they decided that a life of hiding and confinement wasn't for them. Pilate and Macon left the household and went into the woods. After 3 days, they came across a cave. Inside the cave, Macon encountered a man whom he killed after the man pursued him. Pilate and Macon got into a fracas over some gold that the man had in a hole. Pilate didn't want to take it. Macon did. The incident in the cave represents the initial separation between Pilate and Macon, and the crater in their relationship that would never be filled. Pilate left the cave and went to find her family in Virginia. Her travels took her to a town where she was taken in by a preacher, only to be kicked out after the preacher's wife found him sexually harassing her. While in the preacher's care, she attended a school and was given a geography book before she left that she would treasure forever. She decided not to stay in the town and instead found a group of pickers, migrant nomadic people who go around the country and look for work. Everywhere she went, she collected a rock. She stayed with them for 3 years until they discovered she had no navel. She then found another group of pickers, but shortly after she was invited in, she was kicked out for the same reason. Pilate later made her way to Culpeper, Virginia to look for her family again. Instead, she found an island community where she would stay for the next few years. She bed with a man from the island and soon later had Reba, whose name she chose from the Bible. Pilate was given time to recover and left the island and her child behind for 3 months to travel back to the cave to recover the dead man's bones. She returned to the island, only to leave again soon after. This time, she took her child with her and would never return. Pilate and her daughter traveled for 20 years and only stopped because Reba had a child, Hagar. Hagar was a prissy child, and Pilate knew that they couldn't live that life anymore, so she decided to search for her brother Macon. After going through many organizations, they finally found that Macon was living in Flint, Michigan. Pilate flew there, and upon arrival, she was greeted with bitter resentment from her brother. Throughout her entire life, Pilate had faced extreme hostility and oppression, whether it be the death of her father, all of those who resent her for her navel, or Macon's hatred of her. She even faced hostility from Qatar, who would eventually take her life. She withstands all of the anger and violence and learns to live more peacefully and happily. Before the birth of Hagar, Pilate had a serious change in her life. She was somewhat renewed. The change came after she began to take offense to the hostility brought by her navel. She realized that she had no navel and that she would get hostility and got rid of any assumption that she had ever made and began her life from point blank. She went on a pursuit of knowledge. Pilate had no fear of death and barely any boundaries when it came to being social. This, in a way, is her enlightenment. She became more content with life and realized the struggles and what she had to do in order to live a good life. Pilate also lived a very transcendentalist life, much like the life Henry David Thoreau idealized, except even more rugged and natural. At first, she lived as a woods wild girl, especially on her father's farm and with the pickers. Even at an older age, she still lived a transcendentalist life in the city. This is somewhat contradicting, but Pilate threw away nearly every luxury she could and lived happily. She had no plumbing or electricity and barely a bed. The events of Pilate's life have molded her into a smart, enlightened, transcendentalist person.